It was a typical winter night in Kent, Washington. Dorothy Dottie Silzel, a 30-year-old woman with a routine as steady as her work ethic, left her shift at Gaetano's Pizza at around 10 p.m. on February 23, 1980. The short walk home should have been uneventful, just like so many nights before. But when Dottie failed to show up for work the next day, and the day after that, her friends and colleagues grew concerned. For someone as reliable as Dottie, this sudden absence felt like a storm brewing beneath a calm surface. What could have happened between the time she clocked out and the chilling discovery that followed days later? When police finally entered her home on February 26th, they found Dottie lifeless, her body bearing signs of a brutal attack. A part-time job, a quiet night, and a devastating crime. What was the missing piece? How does a woman who left no trail of enemies become the victim of such violence, with not a single witness in sight? In this video, we'll explore the haunting case of Dorothy Silzel, a case that would go cold for over 40 years. But before we dive into this chilling case, I'd like to ask a small favor. The statistics show that more than 70% of you watching aren't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into true crime and want to stay updated on future videos, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel and ensures you don't miss out on any new cases. Now, let's get back to Dottie Silzel's story and the mystery that remained unsolved for over 40 years. Dorothy Dottie Silzel lived a seemingly ordinary life in Kent, Washington, balancing two jobs to make ends meet. Born in Mandan, North Dakota, as the youngest of 9 siblings, she was deeply connected to her family. Moving to Seattle, Washington, she built a new life in Kent, where she maintained close bonds with both her family and her tight-knit community. Dottie's daily routine epitomized her commitment and discipline. She worked full-time at Boeing in Renton as a training supervisor, overseeing the onboarding of new engineers. Her position was significant, as she played an essential role in shaping the future talent pool for one of the most renowned aerospace companies in the world. Despite the demands of her full-time job, Dottie also worked part-time at Gaetano's Pizza. Her second job, just a few blocks from her condominium, helped supplement her income, showcasing her tireless work ethic and determination. By the age of 30, Dottie had created a routine that balanced personal stability and professional growth. This stability extended to her social life, where she was known for her reliability and care for those around her. She rarely missed a day of work, and her absence was often noted immediately. On February 23, 1980, Dottie's day had unfolded like many others. After wrapping up her shift at Gaetano's Pizza, she clocked out between 10 p.m. and 10:15 p.m., a routine time for her departure. The night in Kent was relatively quiet and cool, with nothing unusual in her behavior as she left for home. Little did anyone know that this would be the last time she was seen alive. The path from Gaetano's to her condominium was a short distance, but somewhere along the way, tragedy struck. Her uneventful evening concealed a far darker reality that would unravel days later. As time passed and Dottie failed to report to work at Boeing for the next 2 days, concern began to spread among her coworkers and friends. This behavior was entirely out of character for someone as dependable as Dottie, raising immediate red flags. Her friends, both from Boeing and Gaetano's, became increasingly alarmed and decided to contact the Kent Police Department. They requested a welfare check at her condominium, fearing that something was gravely wrong. On February 26, 1980, officers responded to the call and arrived at Dottie's condominium. Upon arrival, they noticed that the door was unlocked, an unsettling sign considering Dottie's typically cautious nature. The scene inside the home was eerily still. As they made their way upstairs, they discovered her lifeless body in the bedroom. The grim discovery marked the beginning of a complex and haunting investigation. Dottie's body showed clear signs of lividity, indicating that she had been dead for some time. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, likely from a violent confrontation, and had been strangled to death. Adding to the complexity of the case, there was DNA evidence on her body and bathrobe, though forensic technology at the time was not advanced enough to process it fully. The bathrobe, left at the scene, would later become a key piece of evidence, but in the immediate aftermath, it only deepened the mystery surrounding her death. The Kent Police Department launched what would become a long and complex investigation. The first steps were crucial as detectives scrambled to piece together the final moments of Dottie's life. Knowing that she had been last seen leaving her shift at Gaetano's Pizza on February 23, 1980, between 10 p.m. and 10:15 p.m., detectives hoped to retrace her steps. However, the investigation revealed no indication that Dottie had planned to meet anyone after work, nor were there any signs of unusual behavior leading up to her disappearance. Dottie's life appeared to be one of routine stability, which made the crime even more perplexing. Police reached out to her family, friends, and co-workers, trying to find any clue that might lead them to a motive or potential suspect. All described Dottie as a responsible and hard-working individual, well-liked by her peers, and someone who kept regular contact with her loved ones. No one could think of anyone who might want to harm her, and there were no reports of recent conflicts or personal issues that might have provided a lead. Her coworkers at Boeing described her as diligent and reliable, someone who would never miss work without explanation. Gaetano's Pizza, where she worked part-time, was just a short distance from her home, making her sudden disappearance and murder even more difficult to comprehend. Detectives also examined Dottie's personal life, trying to determine if there had been any relationships, whether personal or professional, that could have led to her death. However, every avenue they explored turned up nothing. She had no known enemies or ongoing disputes, and investigators could not find any indications of financial, romantic, or personal entanglements that might have provided a motive. In an attempt to uncover more clues, police canvassed Dottie's neighborhood, hoping that someone might have seen or heard something on the night of the murder. However, this effort did not yield any significant results. No neighbors reported any unusual noises, suspicious individuals, or disturbances on the night of February 23rd. It appeared that the crime had been committed without attracting attention, deepening the mystery surrounding the case. One of the major challenges facing investigators at the time was the lack of technology that could effectively process the DNA evidence collected from the scene. In 1980, forensic DNA testing was in its infancy, and there were no databases like those available today to match the DNA profile found on Dottie's body. The DNA would sit in evidence storage for years, as detectives followed up on other potential leads, including tips from the public, but nothing concrete emerged. With no witnesses, no clear suspects, and DNA evidence that couldn't yet be fully utilized, the case quickly went cold. Over the years, different detectives were assigned to Dottie's case, each hoping to find the breakthrough that had eluded their predecessors. However, despite their determination and efforts, Dottie's killer remained unidentified, and her family was left without answers. For decades, Dottie's family, particularly her brother Jim Yancer, never gave up hope that justice would be served. Jim frequently advocated for the case to be reopened and re-examined, urging police to continue searching for new leads. By the 1990s, forensic DNA testing technology had advanced significantly. But even with this progress, the DNA sample collected from Dottie's case did not lead to any immediate breakthroughs. The DNA, labeled as belonging to an unknown male, had no match in any databases available to law enforcement at the time. Nonetheless, the Kent detectives assigned to the case continued to re-examine the evidence. They compared the DNA with numerous individuals who were considered potential suspects, but none of the samples matched. Despite these efforts, The investigation remained at a standstill, leaving the family frustrated and still in search of answers. Dottie's case was officially considered cold, but it was never forgotten. In 2015, after years of silence, a new push to revisit Dottie's murder came from her family. Members of the Silsel family reached out to the Kent Police Department, urging them to take another look at the case. Detective Tim Ford, who had heard of the case but was not deeply familiar with its details, became involved and took a personal interest in uncovering the truth. Upon reviewing the case files, Ford found himself deeply invested in solving Dottie's murder and became the lead investigator. He combed through the evidence, piecing together every detail from the original investigation. Despite the challenges, Ford remained determined, working on the case for 9 years. His breakthrough moment came in 2022 when he partnered with forensic genealogist Misty Gillis, a senior expert with Identifiers International, a company specializing in using genealogy to trace DNA profiles. Gillis began comparing the DNA profile of the unknown male with publicly available genealogical databases, a method that had recently gained traction in solving other cold cases. This technique uses public genetic information from databases like Family Search and Ancestry to help law enforcement identify suspects by tracing their family trees. After months of research, Gillis identified a list of 11 potential suspects. Among those potential suspects were 2 brothers, Kurt and Kenneth Kundert, who had lived only 1,200 feet from Dottie's condominium at the time of her murder. This proximity immediately raised their profiles in the investigation, but the detectives still had to eliminate one of the brothers to narrow down their search. In early 2023, detectives collected a voluntary DNA sample from Kurt Kundert, but it did not match the DNA found at the crime scene, ruling him out as a suspect. However, Kenneth Kundert refused to provide a DNA sample when approached by police, increasing their suspicions. Kundert's refusal prompted investigators to explore other avenues to obtain his DNA legally. After researching the Kundert brothers' past, detectives discovered that Kenneth had lived in several states over the years, including Washington, and had worked in construction and siding during the time of the murder. However, there was no known personal connection between Kenneth and Dottie Silsel, further complicating the investigation. Despite the lack of clear motive or connection, detectives pressed on, determined to gather the evidence needed to conclusively link him to the crime. In March 2023, the detectives, working alongside the FBI and local law enforcement in Arkansas, where Kenneth now resided, began surveillance. During their surveillance operation, Kenneth was seen smoking a cigarette outside a Walmart store in Clinton, Arkansas. This moment provided the break they had been waiting for. After Kenneth discarded the cigarette, the detectives discreetly retrieved it and sent it to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab for DNA analysis. The results came back as a match. The DNA on the discarded cigarette was identical to the DNA found on Dottie's body and bathrobe 43 years earlier. With this critical piece of evidence, police finally had the connection they needed to make an arrest. On August 20th, 2024, more than 44 years after the brutal murder of Dorothy Dottie Silsel, the Kent Police Department finally made an arrest. Kenneth Kundert, now 65 years old, was taken into custody in Arkansas. After years of frustration, hope, and advocacy from Dottie's family, investigators had finally gathered the evidence needed to bring charges against him. The DNA retrieved from the cigarette he discarded outside a Walmart in Clinton, Arkansas, was a direct match to the DNA found at the crime scene back in 1980. This significant forensic breakthrough allowed law enforcement to charge Kenneth Kundert with first-degree murder. Nevertheless, despite the conclusive DNA evidence linking Kundert to the crime, the case still had unresolved questions. Investigators had yet to establish a clear motive for the murder. Dottie had no known connection to Kenneth, and as of his arrest, detectives were still working to determine whether there had been any previous interactions between the two. It was also unclear whether the crime had been premeditated or opportunistic. Kenneth's long history of living in various states, his low-profile criminal background, and his refusal to cooperate with earlier DNA testing all contributed to the mystery that surrounded his arrest. Following his arrest, arrangements were made to extradite Kundert from Arkansas to Washington State, where he would stand trial for the murder. Though it might take weeks or even months for the legal process to play out, Dottie's family expressed both relief and renewed hope. Her brother, Jim Yancer, publicly praised the Kent police and Detective Tim Ford for their relentless pursuit of justice. The family had long hoped for answers, and now, with Kundert in custody, they believed that they were one step closer to achieving the closure they had sought for over 4 decades. While the trial had yet to begin, the case's resolution represented a significant victory for the use of forensic genealogy in cold cases. So, what do you think the outcome of Kenneth Kundert's trial will be? Will the forensic evidence be enough to secure a conviction, or could new details emerge during the proceedings that change the course of justice? Share your predictions in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. And if you want to stay updated on the latest developments in this case and others like it, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.